What is the craziest encounter of rich kid syndrome that you have experienced? I lived with 5 guys and I was the only one whose parents weren't millionaires, not close at all. They never cleaned. About once a month I would deep clean the house, but 2 days later there was garbage and food on the floor. I found out they all told their parents the poor kid made all the messes when one of their moms came by to scream at me. A consulting manager I worked with was literally Stifler. Even looked like him. He was a Harvard grad, dad was an exec at a huge consulting firm. Smart, but incredibly ditzy and trying really hard to be normal. He walked into work one morning and asked one of his trainees if they got paid this week because he literally couldn't see the difference in his bank account. Not scathing like most of the ones on here. I grew up attending a private school in a developing country, so a lot of my classmates were in the 1% of the country. Whenever we'd be swimming in the school pool, one friend of ours in particular would always remark that swimming is more fun if the pool has a current or waves. To which I had no idea what he was talking about and generally thought he was just being imaginative. One day he invited me over to his house for swimming and he had a 50-foot indoor pool that generated a current, waves. He wasn't lying. They are a lot more fun. My college roommate's mom gave him fucking $1,400 for the weekend just randomly. He blew through the whole thing by Saturday, asked his mom for more money and was screaming at her because she promised $1,400 for the weekend and he spent most of what she gave him on Friday, which isn't a part of the weekend. I actually have a bit of a different story than most of these. Met a friend in Econ 101 on my first day. Pretty humble kid and all-around good guy, so we got along well and were in the same study group. Turns out, kid's dad owned like a supermarket chain in HK and his mom is a managing director at a hedge fund on mainland China, and they were shit-loaded. He never let it show though, and I only found out after about 3-4 months of knowing him. His parents put him in boarding school when he was a kid, but he said it was actually pretty tough since the school gave zero fucks about privilege. Classes were like 1 teacher to every 3 kid and they were hardcore. They eventually sent him overseas for high school in this really upscale place in North Carolina for 4 years. He was one of the most well-mannered kid I knew in college and super humble. Got straight A's throughout college and made me pay attention to since I was prone to slacking. I ended up doing an internship in my junior year with his mom's fund and she wrote me a letter of recommendation later on to help me get a job. We still keep in touch occasionally and he's working for a bank in HK now, pretty much following his mom's footsteps. Still come by NY to visit every year and we usually have dinner with our so's. It's really weird cause I see these kids at school driving Audis/BMWs and this kid is just there to study like everyone else, even though his parents might be the most loaded people I've seen at the school. Look up Corona Del Mar High School cheating scandal, happened at my school. Parents paid around $50K a piece to have a tutor bug the school computers and change students' grades. They all lawyered up big time when it came out and all the kids got off free and all made it into their top 3 schools. Edit. I would also like to add that this made the news, and all the parents whined that their children were innocent and just had a bad tutor. Had a girl I went to school with total 4 brand new cars, think Range Rover, Escalade, etc. I was also in a class with this girl when the teacher handed out papers that needed to be signed by a parent, and she signed it herself and tried to turn it in the same period as it was handed out and freaked out when the teacher wouldn't accept it. Kids who would talk shit and pick fights and then turn around and say, "If you touch me my dad will sue." There are a lot more. Girl I went to high school with got a Mercedes for her 16th birthday. Bitched and moaned about the fact that she didn't get a Lexus, because her name was Lexi and she thought it would be cool for Lexi to drive a Lexus with a custom license plate saying Lexi. Her parents did cave and buy her a Lexus for her 17th birthday. My college roommate threw a massive tantrum, like on the floor screaming and crying, because her parents got her a used big-ass truck for graduation. It was a 2013 truck with less than 10K miles that was fully upgraded, loaded with every possible add-on. We graduated in 2014. The car was maybe a year old. She already had a 2009 Range Rover. A friend I met at UNI flew from Auckland to London for a week to go shopping. Clothes were cheaper in London, so to him it made sense. His parents were from Singapore and had no idea just how much cheaper cars were in New Zealand. So when he said he needed $70,000 for a Toyota Corolla, they gave him the money and he bought a used BMW M3. When he went home for the summer, he asked if I could mind the car for him. Given his dad had pretty much cut him off at that point, he just said I had to pay for insurance on it and I could treat it like my own. But as a 19-yo sharing a flat and barely getting by, there was no way I could cover the cost of insurance, let alone petrol. This happened a couple of weeks ago at the Infiniti dealership. I was in the waiting room with a very well-dressed lady for our loaner cars. She left the waiting room to look at her loaner and came back crying. She said she drives a fully loaded QX80 and they gave her a QX60 with nothing in it. I said sorry that happened and asked how long she was going to have the loaner for. She said a couple of hours. I wanted to tell her to suck it up, but instead I sat there quiet thinking how life must be easy for her to cry over a loaner car. I had a scholarship to private school for my secondary education, 18. We were by no means poor, but compared to the people who were paying full school fees I was a peasant. The vast majority of the students were wealthy, and about half of them were spoiled little brats. Most of the kids got given cars for their 17th birthday in anticipation of passing their driving tests. One boy in particular in my year had a September birthday, so was one of the first to take his test, and he had a huge house, garden, so he already knew how to drive. You can drive on private land at any age here. On the day he passed his test, he got dropped off back at his school in his shiny new sports car. I don't know what type it was, Jeff about cars, but everyone else seemed impressed. He picked up a couple of friends to go for a spin, and before he got towed 100 meters up the road, he completely wrecked the fucking car. His dad bought him a new one the next day and he complained that it was the wrong color. I live in a town that sits on the shore of a really big, not great, but still big, lake. My friends and I decided a few years ago to buy a boat we could take out onto the open water. None of us are poor, but none of us have a shitload of extra money on the side, so we did it as cheap as we could. We bought a decent boat that was over 30 years old and spent 2 years rebuilding the engine, refinishing some of the interior, and generally getting the thing shipshape. We were super proud of the fact that we managed to get a fully functional and reliable boat together for a little under $5,000. Here is where the story starts. We were out on the boat on a beautiful Saturday drinking beers and cruising the beaches for girls that might want to ride on our new boat. This is why any straight man owns a boat. We pulled up to a beach and anchored, and eventually a few girls waded out to us to see if they could have a couple beers. One thing led to another and they were climbing aboard to head out for a spin. This is when I noticed one of the girls was not really excited to be on the boat. We got to the middle of the lake and started swimming off the boat, having a good time, except for that one girl. My friend asked her what was wrong. She replied, "I don't even feel safe on this piece of shit. That's my grandmother's island over there, drop me off now." We were hurt that we had put so much effort into the boat and she dismissed it as a piece of garbage, but whatever, it is kind of a beater. We dropped her off on the island. The dock had over $5 million in boats parked at it. The girl sucked, but grandma was awesome. She brought us all ashore for beers and food and berated her granddaughter for being such a snob. Little old lady, 80 plus, lives out there alone all summer. We go back to the island all the time to help Granny with the yard work and such, in exchange for hanging out on a private island, but I haven't talked to the granddaughter since. My uncle is extremely wealthy, and years ago when he heard I was flying down to view colleges, he casually said, "Why don't you just take the private jet?" To which my 17-year-old response was ha ha. He threw it around so casually like it was something so obvious we had missed. He was serious though. He offered up his private jet for my parents and I to use to go view colleges. Now years later his kid goes to my alma mater and I can fly up, down with him whenever I'm in town, or if there's an emergency. They actually recently offered to fly me to my grandmother's funeral when they learned I couldn't get off work for it, that way I could come and go whenever I needed, but I couldn't miss work. I was department head on a major commercial shoot, and sadly wasn't able to go. That thought alone really helped me. As a kid, I was piss poor. Like we had no money, and barely kept the lights on. My mother did an awesome job, and even worked 2 different jobs and went to night school at one point to make a better future for us. I grew up without a lot of things, but it taught me a lot about what you really need in life, which is a roof over your head and food in your belly. Everything after that is a plus really. I had a lot of friends who were way better off than me, but one kid in particular had everything. He was a Jehovah's Witness, so didn't do birthdays, Christmas, but would often just get stuff to kind of make up for it. At times he would bitch his mother out for buying him something that he thought was crap or wasn't the right model of something, despite getting loads of stuff which was awesome all the time. He was that kid that had all the games/consoles/toys in the world but would moan about it. One of the last times I hung out with him, he was shouting at his mother because she had promised him that she would buy him a new guitar. He was learning, but the time of the day had gotten late and she wasn't able to go. Like it was when all the stores were shut, so it was literally impossible. But this kid just kept chewing her out because of it, and speaking to her like she was some kind of moron. It was painful to watch, and I was like 14 at the time. I stopped hanging around with him after that. I later heard his mother cracked and had enough of him, then kicked him out of the house. He later ended up being a shoplifter and lived in the local YMCA for a bit. In fairness, I think he's back on track now, but as a kid he was a bit of a dick to his parents. Funny short story. My ex-wife used to drive a 1998 Honda Accord. She treated it like shit, and so one day I got into it to drive somewhere and I noticed that it was falling apart. I had two options, junkyard or sell it, and so I put it on Craigslist for $250. I thought it could go to a low-income family that had someone with some know-how who could semi-restore it, but when I meet the buyer he was not who I expected. He pulled up in a brand new Escalade and told me that his son was spoiled. His son had crashed a BMW, Mercedes, and an Audi, and so he was done buying him nice cars. Turns out, this guy purchased my car as a way of torturing his son. Edit, hot damn, I even got Reddit silver as a result of selling that car. Thank you for the coin, stranger. Second edit, of course this edit is to give a shout out to whoever gave me gold. Thank you. 3.5 years on Reddit and 47k in karma later and I got my first gold. Cheers.